Virginia Woolf's process for creating characters is profound and much needed for us as modern authors who are inundated with guides and videos and books on character trait lists and how to do character arcs and all that other crap. And today we are going to hear Woolf speak at length on her process of character reading. And I will break down step by step how Woolf implemented that in her work and how it's still relevant for us here in 2025. And my name is Ian, and here on Right Conscious, we talk about the best books and authors of all time. But I also help authors like you activate so that we can kick off a literary renaissance and have 50,000 Virginia Woolfs running around and changing the world with literature. And so, enough from me, everyone. Let's now hear our first quote from Woolf. Practice character reading until you can live a single year of life without disaster. And so Woolf's formula for creating characters is called character reading. But what does that mean? So with character reading, Woolf goes beyond just listing and discovering personality traits and doing stream of consciousness exercises and all the other stuff we've all heard before. Rather, Woolf first argues that we need to attune our consciousness to be able to correspond and be in a co-creative relationship with our characters. And if that may seem a little woo to you, this is how great writing happens. It stems not from logic bros, but from empathetic individuals who can connect beyond superficiality. And that's important because when you look at a modern individual, we all have unstable, shifting, and contradictory inner lives and gray morality. And being able to sit on the sidelines and be able to just feel without judgment, without logic, is a harder skill than you can maybe even imagine. And Woolf recognized the art and the eminence, I should say the eminent nature of having to learn to do this, because in her essay, Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Brown, Woolf argues that in this modernist shift that happened at the start of the 20th century, a psychological rupture occurred that broke us away from the Victorian era. There was a collective awakening in the West, and people everywhere of all classes suddenly became more inward, more fragmented, more elusive, more complex. Because if you think about it, in time immemorial, many of us were illiterate, just living day to day and stuck in base consciousness. And then the aristocracy was conditioned through social and cultural norms. And so they were somewhat easy to read also, because if you know the input, most of the time you can determine the output. But with the 20th century, especially the early 20th century, exploding in terms of economic prosperity and people, normal people having access to the arts because of paperback books and whatnot, creating characters became a bigger deal. And during Woolf's time, people were still trying to hold on to the Victorian era, because if you look at people like the Spanish symbolists and Lorca and Pound and Williams and all of those guys and Rilke, just everyone in the modernist movement, they had moved beyond. They had made a clean break from the Victorian era, from the old position, and built upon German Romanticism. And we're even going into uncharted territory. But another school of thought called Edwardian realism, with authors like H.G. Wells, Arnold Bennett, and others, were still holding on to this idea that we need to focus on the external, that focusing on the internal is a maze that we can get lost, that writers get lost in. And so we should focus on the house and not the people in the house, which today, that seems somewhat silly to us. Like, why would you do that? That seems like a easy way to write a bad novel, but these were the literary themes at the time. And so Woolf argued and was a visionary, building upon many others prior to her. But Woolf knew that entering the stream of consciousness was a better way of capturing what a real human being is. And I just want to give a quick eulogy here that, along with Sexton, Plath, John Berryman, and others who were innovators into kind of this confessional, deep internal world, like, breaking into it in terms of an artistic sense, they all committed suicide. It was very treacherous waters and a really hard thing to do. So I would like to thank her for that, because, being the trailblazer for all this is, it's insane. And so first and foremost, character reading is a rejection of kind of the superficial norms, these prepackaged identities, which thus, kind of shift the plot toward action. But Woolf wanted to have her narratives, driven by thought. If you look at Woolf's work, Mrs. Dalloway, it follows Clarissa, and it's just one day. It's just her thoughts across an entire day. And so in Woolf's conception, character reading is a co-creative process of learning about other people, but also learning about yourself. Because if you remember the quote, and I'll put it back up, practice character reading until you can live a single year of life without disaster. And what she means by this is that until you truly understand people by observing them, their psychology, their contradictions, who they actually are, their fears, so many different things, you are going to continue to walk into bad situations. I tell this to my students all of the time. They're like, I want to leave, the town we live in. I want to go live here. And they always have all these problems. And I'm like, dude, you're going to get to this new place and just find all the same people and run into all the same problems again. This is a you problem. And so I love this because it calls us to look at ourselves and understand our own character before we start writing other characters. This is something that I always laugh about in the genre community. These symphonies, these pantheon of characters in these novel series that these people write. And they read so flat to me. And then when I personally know some of these authors, and they haven't really put in the work to individuate in their own life, while others have done that work at an insane level. And we laugh about people like Virginia Woolf, who ends up killing herself, or David Foster Wallace, who kills himself, or Cormac McCarthy, who's getting with underage girls and stuff. But they were putting in the work. They didn't solve all of their problems or some of their malignant aspects of personality. But if you look at their life, they were not just sitting around and being complacent. They were always putting in the work and fighting against demons and doing these things. And by doing that, they had the humbleness, but then the ability to observe others better. If you look at all those authors I just said, a lot of their work stems from life experiences. Faulkner, Cormac McCarthy lived in the South, were of the people, talked to the people, loved the Southern people, and were able to write masterpieces because of it. David Foster Wallace was able to write Infinite Jest because he was in a halfway house and had to be humbled and had to listen in silence. And that brings me to our second quote by Virginia Woolf. Eavesdrop, listen to the way people speak, but pay special attention to their silence. And this is a real thing also, that what people don't say a lot of the time is more important than what is being said. And this is something that I've learned the hard way, that being subtle, relaxed in conversations and reading into things and watching, body language and those things is more important a lot of the time than what people are actually telling you. And these are the things that matter with character reading, because when you are writing a story, you have to leave that stuff in. You can create so much tension with the reader and create almost an inside joke and, do these beautiful patterns when someone or a character is being silent about something and something's wrong. A great example of this is Kashiro Ishiguro's Remains of the Day. And in there's this butler who just is so focused on his butler job. He doesn't notice that this woman wants to get with him and all this stuff. And the silences in these things are just so immense. And this character isn't getting it, but you as the reader are getting it. And you're like, oh my God. And here in another quote from Woolf, she says that, quote, observe strangers. Let your own version of their life story shoot through your head, how they got where they are now, where they might be going, and fill in the blanks for yourself. And this is something that a lot of us are actually missing in our suburban environment, that when you look at a lot of the great authors, they were very social, took public transportation, were of the world, were in the military, or these types of things, and could really kind of get a wide-ranging environment of people that are talking. And something else that's sadly happened, the other day I was at a coffee shop and I ended up, it's called Exo Coffee in Tucson. And in one of the rooms, they have instruments. So my wife plays the guitar. So she was playing Blackbird by the Beatles. And then there was this man in there and he started talking to her because him and his wife, and he plays music. And so then he got on the piano and played some music on the piano, and it was great. And funny enough, there was even though there's a music room, there was music in there, and he told them, hey, can you turn this down? I don't want there to be chill coffee lounge music going as we're playing music, and they're like, oh, we can't turn this off. And then there were some people sitting in there, and they like left because I guess it was too loud. But he was telling me, because he's in his 70s, that back, he lived in San Francisco and Los Angeles and Chicago, that back in the day, coffee shops, everyone, like, it was popping off. People would be in there playing music, reading poetry, arguing about politics, and there were no phones. And he said that was the culture, that's why you went to coffee shops. And I was just sitting there, I was like, damn, like, could you imagine, like, I go to a coffee shop and I could just play some music, read some of my poetry, like do stuff like that, and people would listen and they would be like into it. And that was happening here in America. But now with digital technology, you go to a coffee shop and it's terrible, bro. It's just people trying to work, like signal to people that they are working and important as they're drinking their coffee. And it's like, bro, you could do that at home, which is wild. Like, really, like, you're the most productive at home. And if you can't figure that out, then you have a problem. You go to coffee to talk to people, to hang out, And so anyway, in our suburban environments, I have a friend who is a writer, and we've talked about this before, and it's kind of dawning on him that he went to public school around all these kids, who were just trying to get by, not really activated, not really caring about education or talking about deep things. Then he went to college and got a degree in like accounting. And now he works this accounting job, and everyone he works with is just like, they're cool, but no, there's no real discussion happening. And so the only place he can get that is online, but a lot of online doesn't really count. And so he doesn't really have, and I would say I'm the same way, and you probably are too. We don't have this kind of data from strangers. And I know that some of the most valuable stuff I've done, not just for my writing, but in life, was when I worked in Las Vegas. I was a lifeguard at the Flamingo Pool and the Caesar's Palace Pool for a while. And that made me single-handedly never drink again. I was like, I saw what alcohol leads to. And I was like, you know what? This is the dumbest drug in the world. But I observed countless people, countless disasters. And then while doing security, it was even more so that as a lifeguard, I can't hear the conversations, but as a security guard at casinos in Las Vegas, I'd be at these conventions and I'd be invisible. I'd be, in these halls with, top people in their industry talking. I would just be watching them. And what was interesting is a lot of that was help my own character reflection. And when you look at Woolf's life, she was traveling around everywhere. And this brings up another question that, as I was just saying, people used to have opinions and have ideas. Who has ideas anymore? Like, we have more people than ever who believe in like half truths and lies and politics and these things, but they've just been conditioned to think that way, which I guess with the propaganda in the early 20th century, it was very similar. But there I go. Woolf would say that these people have so much complexity within it, but you can't judge. You can't sit and say, hey, this guy's a this or a that. And so I have a question for you guys, though. This is a little bit random, but do you feel like you could do this online? So like, can you do this with me? Like, maybe you've watched 50 of my videos. Can you character read me through this screen, through what I'm telling you, or through watching, let's say, The Bachelor or Love is Blind or whatever dumb show? Can we actually do that through the screen? It makes me wonder, because there are people like David Foster Wallace and others who have built a lot of their career off of not necessarily what they've experienced in person, even though they do include that in some of their works, but also what they've seen on television. And so if you believe that's true, that may be a major advantage, that right now at your fingertips, you could find people if you're writing a novel about people in Tennessee, you could just look up Tennessee vloggers and Tennessee family vlogs and yada, yada, yada. And you'd probably have unlimited material. And is that the bridge that we have to climb? Is that the opportunity that has presented itself for us, that we can use digital technology for this research from our house, in our comfort, and not actually have to go out? I don't know, but it seems that's how it's lined up. And as I just said, it seems like you can't really get that exposure outside of rare circumstances in person. So that may be what we need to do. And so thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for all the support on the channel. If you guys want to join my book club, take some of my literature and writing courses, some of which are free, read my writing, hang out with me on Substack where the literary renaissance is going on. My link to my Substack is down in the description below. And if I do not see you over there, I will see you guys in the next video.